Let's start off with an easy interval, the major interval, and then compare it with the inversion of that interval, the half tone. Let's further agree that we can invert an interval by taking the top note and putting it on the bottom. It is also good to think of the word flip for the same thing. You can invert an interval or you can flip an interval. Choose your own word, whatever floats your boat. Now listen to these two intervals. You can hear that they are both very crunchy, an informal name for sounds that are dissonant. Now let's take those two intervals inserted into a major 7 chord to hear how these very crunchy intervals suddenly sound very smooth. For this reason, your go-to interval for a major 7 and a half tone will always be a major 7 chord. No other chord makes these intervals sound so smooth. I'm doing this in the key of C. The only difference between the intervals and the chords is that the intervals only have 2 notes, but the chords have 4. Now let's do exactly the same thing, but this time in the key of F, to show that the sound is exactly the same except it is transposed. Now let's start off with another easy interval, the smaller 7, and its inverted interval, the tone. This is the interval that has many different names and can be highly confusing. In the past, I have struggled trying to find the best name, and I have settled on 3 other possibilities at various times: smaller 7, regular 7, and flat 7. But I am now simply using the label dominant 7 interval for this particular interval. Once again, let's agree that we can invert an interval by taking the top note and putting it on the bottom. Again, we can call this inverting or flipping. You always choose the word you think is most appropriate. As you listen to these two intervals, notice that they are only mildly crunchy, mildly dissonant, and easily fit into a dominant 7 chord that we are using as our go-to chord. I will immediately follow the intervals with the chords, and I will put the whole thing in the key of G. Finally, let's do the same thing in the key of C. More and more we are getting out of Escher's musical wonderland. We are moving away from the intervals that are highly confusing because they have several different names depending upon how they look on the page. We can always get back to those more complicated names if we need them in the future, but we don't want to depend upon them as we are learning how music works. I am moving more and more to the world of jazz theorists. I don't follow everything they do. I am not a follower by nature, but I do agree with many of their ideas, and I am totally on board with the idea of being as practical as possible. That is my purpose as I move away from the Escher musical wonderland ideas. There is only one more subject for the future that I will go into later in depth. I am only mentioning it briefly here. Sometimes our bigger and smaller 7s are respelled to look different. When they are respelled, the dominant 7 interval suddenly has only 6 letters, and the major 7 interval suddenly has 8. If you have a mind for trivia, you can remember that the dominant 7 chord, when it is spelled with 6 letters, is called an augmented 6th interval. When the major 7 is respelled with 8 letters, it is called a diminished octave. But all you want to remember is that there are complicated reasons for respelling the dominant 7 and the major 7, and they have nothing to do with what we play, what we hear, and what we see and feel in our hands. Actually, there is one more thing I want to mention. In traditional theory, intervals are often taught before chords. I believe it should be the other way around. I believe it is best to get our intervals from chords, and that starting with intervals first is putting the cart before the horse. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Please let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you would like to see in the future.